Today, we're going to review the Luxman L-507z integrated amplifier. Well, once again, boys and girls, I have a treat for you. The Luxman company has been around for a long time. It's a Japanese manufacturer. They go back as long as I've been in audio, which is 50 plus years. And they have a history of making some impressive and interesting pieces of electronics. But they're kind of a niche manufacturer, so you may not be that familiar with them. But I hope in this review we get to touch on some of the things that make Luxman special. So the L507Z is a 110 watt per channel, 210 watts into 4 ohms integrated amp. So that means it's a preamp and an amplifier combined into a single chassis. It's priced at $9,000 or a little bit less in the United States. And that means you can think about it like you would think about maybe a $5,000 power amp and a $3,000 preamp, or $4,000 preamp, something like that. You'd have to buy cables to connect the preamp and so on. And anyway, so $5,000 or $6,000 power amp together with a $3,000 or $4,000 preamp gets you to the $9,000 that we're talking about here. Let's start out with, and I'm going to get to this in more detail, I don't think you're buying this amplifier because as an integrated package, it's the best possible deal. You're not really saving money in terms of absolute cash outlay. So what are you doing here? Why would you even consider this power amp? It's not the most powerful. You can definitely get more power for less money. It's not the fanciest or most amazing, although I will say the fit and finish on this thing is top notch. It's just beautifully finished and classically styled and very well put together. It weighs about 55 pounds, so it's meaty, beady, big, and bouncy, that's for sure. So this is a high quality piece of gear, and that might be a consideration. But some of you will want more sonic reasoning behind why you would consider a $9,000 integrated amplifier. All right, so let me try to explain what's going on here, because I think there is a really good reason that this integrated amp is the one that you might really want. First of all, it's an integrated amp. So if you're living in a relatively small space and you don't have tons of room, you don't want 15 pieces of equipment scattered all over the place, and you may have a domestic partner who isn't really down with monoblocks on the floor and wires everywhere and so on. So integrated amps are a nice packaging compromise to give you almost everything you can have with separates, maybe even more than you can have with separates, in a more domestically friendly package. That part, I think, I don't know, that might be kind of obvious. You're either interested in an integrated amp or you're not, for those kinds of reasons. But I want to get down to the sonic reason that I think makes this Luxman integrated really special. And that is, I'm going to put it in a nutshell, it has the most grainless sound I have heard from almost any amplifier combination below the $50,000 price point. Okay, what do I mean by grainless? When musicians are playing instruments, you can typically hear this very well on, say, solo violin or violins that are playing at relatively low level in, say, a symphony or a chamber orchestra. I used Beethoven string quartets to notice this, but I also really heard it on some of the early Mahler symphonies. The third and fourth Mahler symphonies have kind of a folk music element. A lot of Mahler has a folk music element, but they especially have gentle folk music that's very pure, individual instruments or a small number of instruments playing. And when you hear those instruments playing, you suddenly realize it's more like just the instrument and no sense that the equipment has intervened and laid a little bit of an edge, or what we might call, what we often do call, grain to the sound. It's just pure string tone and nothing else. Is that something you should care about? Uh, well, if you had to sacrifice something, I might say no. It's pretty subtle. You have to really like purity, and you have to like certain kinds of music, folk music. Individual guitars do this well. Singers can bring this out. You don't want grain in the sound, but because it's so subtle, if you had to make big sacrifices to get there, I'd have a harder time advising that you really take a look at this. But in the case of the Luxman 507, I don't really see a downside. This thing is crazy dynamic. I played some John McLaughlin and Al Di Meola that is wild 1 million notes per second guitar licks, super dynamic, super punchy, and the Luxman just took it in stride and really made it sound like the performers were kind of there on stage just playing away at, you know, pretty high volume, very high tempo, as I said, 1 million notes per second. Another track I used that kind of shows the dynamism of this power amp is Cindy Blackman Santana. She has an album with her husband, Carlos, who you may have heard of, but she's an amazing drummer, and the music is extremely dynamic, and it just sounded natural and effortless. That's really what I think you want with an amplifier combination. You want the dynamics to sound effortless and like they're real, and I think the Luxman does an outstanding job of that. What you also don't want, if you want to put it in the negative, is you don't want to get that purity and grainlessness that I talked about by having the amplifier combination make tonal sacrifices, or to put it bluntly, to fake it. You've probably heard what I'm talking about. You get clarity with a little bit of edge and brightness, or you get smoothness but with a little bit of dullness, and vocals have a little bit of this effect. Yeah, that's faking it. You don't want that. What I found with the Luxman that I thought was brilliant, absolute genius, was you get this grainless sound with sense of balance and realism that makes you pretty convinced that this is a special circuit design and not some endeavor to tweak the sonic signature one direction or another to pull off some effect. So I think this grainless purity that the Luxman delivers is really wonderful. I think you do have to realize that there are some limitations to an amplifier like this. One, and sort of obvious, is this is not the ideal amplification system for highly inefficient speakers, and especially not highly inefficient speakers in large rooms. Of course, I talked earlier about how an integrated amp is an ideal package if you have limited space and you want things to be, in your domestic environment, to be neat and clean. So here you go, here's an amplifier that works well in relatively small spaces and works well with medium to high efficiency speakers. The speakers I used have about an 88 dB efficiency, which I would consider medium. You know, Wilsons, which are pretty high efficiency, are 92 or 93 dB efficient. Magnepans, which are pretty low efficiency, are 84 or 85 dB efficient. So this is like a 250 watt amplifier on Magnepans, and 250 watts on Magnepans will get the job done, and so does this, which is why I found the dynamics of the amp to really excel. I used a medium efficiency speaker in a medium-sized room, and there you go. Really an ideal combination. So, but this is not the amplifier for big spaces and inefficient speakers. Let's just put it that way. This is also not the amplifier that you want to use if you're a finicky vinyl aficionado. What I mean by that is it does have a phono preamp built in, and you could certainly run an external phono preamp into it, but the phono preamp doesn't have adjustments for resistance and capacitance, which some of you will want to play with to optimize the sound of your particular cartridge. I don't consider that to be a big deficit. The phono preamp is almost there for free, but on the other hand, for $9,000, and then having to go out and buy a separate phono preamp if you felt you needed to, that's maybe what we would consider a drawback. Other than that, I don't think there are really many downsides to this amplifier. Use it in the right environment, enjoy its grainless sound, and don't look back. You're going to love the way this sounds. It's one of those amplifiers that I want to call musical, but I don't want you to think that means faking it and making the music sound some way that it's not meant to sound. As an example of the realism that this thing can produce, I regularly and very clearly heard the differences between Redbook CD and even 48K 24-bit high res. For sure, 192K high res sounds phenomenally better on this power amp. It's not going to play with the sound and try to make it into something that it wasn't intended to be. It's going to give you an honest appraisal of what's going on, and I happen to think that's fantastic. That might not be your cup of tea, but that's the deal with this power amp. It gives you purity in a way that very few other preamp amp combinations will give you, especially not at this price point. And that makes it special in my mind. It doesn't make it automatically the amplifier for you. The final point I'd like to touch on just briefly is a few thoughts on $9,000 for an integrated amp. To some of you is going to seem like a lot of money. And I would advise that, I mean, if you don't have $9,000, it's just too much money and really the story is over. But I think the value system that imagines that watts per dollar or pounds per dollar or kilograms per dollar, however you want to look at it, and number of features per dollar is the way we should measure things, doesn't always make sense in the audiophile world. And sometimes, if you can imagine this, it requires a designer to say, what I really want to do is produce musical authenticity. And to produce musical authenticity, what I have to do is I have to spend a huge amount of R&D trying different circuit combinations and experimenting with what works the best. And R&D is not free. And I also have to choose component devices like output transistors or integrated circuits or whatever the devices in the amplifier might be, with an eye to achieving the objective, which in this case I believe is sonic purity and authenticity. And that might mean that those output devices just don't have the capability to do 200 or 300 watts per channel, so you're not going to get what seems like the most screaming deal, but what you are going to get is an amplifier you can love for a long, long time, assuming its power output is suitable for your usage scenario. So, in a way, I think this amplifier is a pretty good deal. I've heard the big Swiss amplification products, and they do this kind of thing too, but they're 10 times the price, 5 times the price, more than 10 times the price. Depends exactly what you're talking about. So you can see this as a good deal or a bad deal depending on how you look at it, but I think in the value system that says show me better for less, you're going to have a heck of a time finding more purity for less money. That's why I love the Luxman L-507z. I think it's a great integrated amplifier. I think a lot of you would really enjoy it, provided your heads and logic don't get in the way and just sit down and listen to music and are startled by the beauty of what this amplifier can get across. I hope you've enjoyed this review. I hope you'll stop back for more. To do so, please subscribe. You can see the subscribe button down below. Click on the notifications button. That way you'll get more of our reviews in your feed, and we really appreciate your support.